Chapter 10. Sight Beyond Seeing. Is that everything you discovered? Alistair asked after they recounted the day's events. That's not much information to act on, though it is strange that blue caps are disappearing. Indeed, said Llewellyn, leaning back against the couch in the upper common room. But minimally, we have two sources pointing toward something strange occurring, if not more. In the first place, Laura detected the smell of sulfur in the area, even though no sulfur deposits had been found in the nearby area. Second, my trace spell found some magic, different from what the blue caps were using. Third, he looked toward Hazel, who sat drinking her tea. Hazel had a dream. I did, but I don't know how useful it'll be, Hazel said, staring into her teacup. Dreams make more sense when I'm in them. When I wake up, it's just a lot of vague impressions, and not every dream comes true, so this might mean nothing. And yet you thought it relevant enough to ask the foreman about it, Llewellyn said. Maybe you're right. I'll tell you about my dream, Hazel said, watching the tea leaves swirl in her cup. I was in a forest at night when I noticed a small blue flame, then another, and another, and dozens more. They were together in the darkness between the trees. I lost sight of the trees, and only the many blue flames in the night remained. The blue flames shrank as they faded into the distance, and as the darkness shut on them, I realized the blue flames burned in the gaping jaws of some monster. I couldn't make out its details, but they were bright white eyes, and it was made of shadows. That's all I can remember. The group sat in silence for a moment, digesting what Hazel revealed. After a while, Laura raised her eyebrows. So, does that sound familiar to anyone? I get the blue caps are like the fire in her dream, but what about the shadow thing that held them? It sounds a little like our grim friend, honestly. Alistair gaped. Garrow would never. I'm not saying he would, Laura interrupted, holding up a hand. I'm saying that as far as creatures made of shadows with jaws go, there are similarities. She isn't wrong, Llewellyn said. Grims are among the few Fae who use shadow magic, and yet are not destructive by nature. Plenty of Fae of the Unseelie Court possess similar powers. It's strange, though. None of the ones I know of care for capturing or eating blue caps. Actually, most tend to not care what other kinds of Fae do and prefer to focus more on the affairs of humans. Are you certain it's Fae? Alistair said. Given the vague nature of what we've discussed and learned, it sounds like it could be a daimon, a vampire, or perhaps even a human using magic. We also aren't sure how literally we should interpret her dreams. For all we know, a giant shadow monster eating blue caps could be metaphorical. Llewellyn's eyes narrowed. I can't say for certain that it is Fae, but I strongly suspect it is. The magic I detected seemed more chaotic than most humans or daimon, but there's so little it'd be difficult to say definitively. The sulphurous smell also indicates malevolent intent and magic, though that's a trait shared by Fae, daimon, and spirits. As for it being a certain kind of vampire, I find that improbable. Based on what I've gathered from being around you, Alistair, the magic trails you leave behind are next to none. Aside from that, your aura is relatively calm, which is not the case for the magic I sensed at the site. Alistair mused, holding his chin between his thumb and forefinger. There are other species of vampire that are magically gifted, but it's not a point worth debating. I suppose we should report this information back to the commander. Why bother? Laura yawned. We haven't learned anything of value yet. The best we have are hunches and what the foreman said. Anyone could have gotten that much. I'm inclined to agree, said the deep, ethereal voice of Garrow as he stepped from the shadows. Shit! Lara exclaimed, bolting upright. Do you have to do that? The Grim grinned. No, it's just more fun, too. He looked at the others. You can make your report after you have new information. I thought you were going to Eliara, Llewellyn said, unsurprised by his arrival. I did, and now I'm back. I wanted to hear the details of your mission. I would like to act as a counselor of sorts for the group. The least I could do is help you through your first assignments. Do you know about the shadow things in my dream? Garrow looked at Hazel. There are many creatures capable of bending shadows. Llewellyn has already said as much as I would know on the subject, unfortunately. Did you find any tracks? No, there were none, Lara said. Even if they had covered their tracks, I would have found something. But there was nothing nearby. Not even local wildlife, despite what the foreman said. The only signs of wildlife were a distance from the wall, but specifically avoided the sulfurous smells. That narrows it down. Garrow sat. It means these creatures are almost pure shadow. They likely avoid daylight. How could they steal or hurt something if they were pure shadow? Lara asked. Shadow creatures are intangible in their default state, Garrow said. They can, using their innate magic, make themselves partially tangible or entirely tangible. This can include going from virtually weightless to possessing great mass. There are limits to these abilities and they vary with the creature, but one thing these creatures have in common is they rarely leave much of a trace except for some vague aroma. Like the sulfur. Precisely. He thought for a moment. It may be useful for you to know that my powers are similarly weakened by light. Creatures of shadow have similar flaws, though they vary in how effective and deadly light is against them. Lara twirled her hair between her fingers idly. So, how do we know this thing wasn't actually just flying around? I mean, succubi and other creatures leave behind a smell and also fly, which would negate the footsteps. A good point, Llewellyn said. But these creatures are not shadow-based. I think Hazel's dream ought to be taken literally. Still, when we patrol tonight, I think we can determine whether the creature is of shadow. Ambassador Garrow, is there anything you require of us? Not at all. I'm simply here at your disposal. I may retire to the library if any would like support or advice. For at least a little while, I shall be here to help you navigate the Evenfall Vigil, but I will not command you. I think I'll join you downstairs. Alistair rose to his feet. There may be some books on this subject, and there's always more organizing to do. Garrow gradually disappeared into the shadows, until no trace of him remained as Alistair descended the stairs. Llewellyn glided quietly to his room without a word, while Lara reclined on the couch and was soon snoring. Hazel hesitated, uncertain of where to go. Eventually, she walked to Llewellyn's room. His bedroom was closest to the stairway leading down to the formal common area. She paid little attention to the doors, but she noticed a similar placard to the one on her door, which bore a hazelnut and a tree. This was less identifiable. The center of it was a conjurer's circle, with myriad shapes and geometric designs within. The circle was broken sharply in 3 different areas, through its center in jagged cuts, like the circle had been smashed. Beneath the circle was an arrowhead pointing down, whose backward-facing barbs flowed around the outside of the circle like wisps of smoke. The complete image was intricate, disturbing, and sad to Hazel, but she didn't know why. She reached to touch the symbol when the door opened. Llewellyn sat cross-legged in the center of the room, about 15 feet from the door. His eyes remained shut, but Hazel got the impression he opened the door magically. "Come in, Hazel." She stepped in and scanned her surroundings. The room resembled hers, but austere. A small window in the far corner admitted little light compared to the floating mage lamps positioned around the perimeter. No decorations or extraneous art adorned the walls, but a statuette of Selavara stood by his bedside. Llewellyn frowned, his eyes still closed. "You wondered about something in the hallway. Something about me." She studied the Dark Elf Warlock. "Yes. How did you know?" "There are many forms of sight a spellcaster can use," he said, his breathing and voice maintaining a constant level. "I used insight. Insight, when one is relaxed enough, can reveal realities beyond physically knowable by opening oneself to the constant flow of magic. It's less intrusive than direct telepathy, though I could have used that on you if I wished. What was it you wanted to know?" "What does the symbol on your door mean?" Llewellyn sighed and opened his eyes. He looked away from her. A strange sadness mixed with shame and apprehension played over his face as he wrung his hands. "Those are the symbols of my people combined. The arrowhead disappearing into shadows represents the Dark Elves, creatures of subterfuge and night. The broken circle represents the Warlocks, the Oathbreakers. Together, they make the Dark Union." "I remember Commander Comir said something about you being an Oathbreaker. What does that mean?" He folded his hands in his lap. Hazel could see tension as his hands squeezed each other. "How much do you know about Warlocks, Hazel?" "Not much. I know they use magic and they're dangerous. They also look human." "All accurate, though the last part is incomplete. Warlocks are human." Llewellyn separated his hands as swirls of gray smoke weaved between his fingers. "A few thousand years ago, a contingency of mages separated from the Council of Archmages. They believed humans were flawed in their use of magic. Most other races, such as elves, fairies, and daimon, use magic innately, essentially making their will manifest directly through magic. Humans had to learn. As a result, the lifespan of humans only increases in proportion to magical ability. Some reasoned this was unfair, and sought to make magic more accessible. They didn't want to use magic, they wanted to become magic. It may seem like mages cast spells quickly, but their access to the flow is limited and takes considerable effort and time to master. This group was anathema for speaking such blasphemy. Humans were given magic by Selavara, who, the legends say, only required their willingness to study and dedicate themselves. The Warlocks realized there was more to the story than simple myth, and reasoned that if the oath which bound humanity to Selavara's gift was ruptured, they would have direct access to magic others lacked, power to an unprecedented degree, and the ability to change reality on a whim without all the laborious study typically required. They called upon the gods of chaos, specifically Nostravain and Terek Malame, and created a powerful circle near the Nox Fatalis mountain range, at the edges of Eliara, a great well of arcane magic. With the combined might of each mage, they broke the circle. It was only upon the third break they became true warlocks. They were cursed with black eyes, like a bottomless void, reflecting their insatiable lust for power. The darkness spread through their veins and bodies, giving them a frightening appearance. They were successful. They had broken their ties to the Lady of Magic. They did not anticipate the flood of power each received. Every warlock could channel a nearly endless amount of magic through himself, which could cause considerable wonders at will. Their ability to contain the magic was, however, flawed. "What do you mean?" Hazel asked. "How is it flawed?" "When a warlock uses too much power, it becomes intoxicating." She saw a flicker of hunger in his eyes, overwhelmingly so. Immense arcane forces flow through too rapidly to control, and the warlock's body dissolves into the flow of magic. When the warlock dies, he creates an arcane cataclysm, which warps the area around him for many miles until it is contained. It destroys everything and twists the world into a chaotic distortion, wherein the most improbable things become the most probable, and safety, reason, and strength are rendered meaningless. He sighed and appeared calm. "A warlock is immensely powerful and lethal, but if he ever releases his power, if I should ever release my power, many people would die." "But I've seen you use magic. You didn't seem to have any problems." "Small uses do nothing to me, especially when I'm calm. It's my emotional state that triggers it. Strong emotions such as anger, hate, or fear can all lead to overexerting my powers." Hazel pondered this. "What about other powerful emotions, like joy?" Llewellyn raised an eyebrow. "Joy? I'm not sure I'm capable of experiencing such a thing. While I've lived my life surrounded by joy, it has never touched me. I lived with light elves, and yet I shrank from their kindness and frivolity. Even my mentor brought me little in the way of happiness. He showed me contentment, and that's really all I've ever needed." "Contentment does not compare to real joy, if you say so." Hazel stood in silence while Llewellyn stared unfocused at the floor, his expression difficult to read. This person before her, so placid, had never known happiness. It was hard to fathom. Although at present she couldn't feel such things herself, she had memories of laughing with friends, celebrating birthdays with her family, and the many little delights of childhood. The present emotional fog she was in was ever present for Llewellyn, she thought, except he must choose it for the good of others. His seriousness and subdued affect now made sense to her. "There was a time I felt something close to joy," he said after a while, "but it nearly killed me and many residents of Eliara. I let my power flow, and I've never experienced anything so intoxicating and freeing. It was euphoric. The only thing I desired was more power. It was only because of Kieran that I didn't destroy anyone." "Who's Kieran?" Llewellyn averted his eyes. "He was my mentor, my friend, and the closest thing I had to a father, as far as I understand the concept of one." Hazel watched him. "Your parents didn't raise you?" "No. You could say I was adopted. During one of the many conflicts between the Dark and Light Elves, Kieran found me. He was human, which is why I'm still alive today. The Light Elves have an undisguised dislike for Dark Elves, and the sentiment is mutual. Kieran was helping the Light Elves retake territory in Eliara. They found me abandoned by my parents. Many urged him to kill me, anticipating the damage I could inflict. But he saw an opportunity. He thought I deserved to live and prove no one is born evil. From then on, he mostly stayed in Eliara, although he would take intermittent trips out to meet with other spellcasters." His voice quieted as his gaze fell to the floor. "He taught me almost everything I know, But most importantly, he taught me how to cast spells without going too far. He showed me how to wield magic like a human spellcaster instead of a dark elf or warlock. I learned how to meditate and feel the magic around me and breathe with its contours and understand the sensation of it without seeking to control it. He taught me many things, one of which I will show you now. He shook himself. Please, sit. Hazel nodded and sat cross-legged across from him on the floor, assuming a similar position. He looked at her with his dark red eyes as he spoke evenly and softly. Your power is one few possess. People gifted with foresight, or precognition, as some call it, often experience dreams first. When we sleep, the flow of magic pervades us, without our conscious minds to block it. Your mind naturally draws magic into it in such a way that it predicts the outcome of reality itself. Since magic is the quintessence of all things, even things which have not yet come to exist. Because your mind draws magic to it on its own, all that's necessary is for you to learn how to allow magic to flow through you while you're awake. It begins passively, but as you open yourself to its use, the visions will grow clearer and you will control it. He closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath before looking at her with sharpened focus. My foresight is limited and only functions with considerable effort, and there are others much more gifted with seeing what lies ahead. I am better with farsight, or clairvoyance as it is also known. I can share a sense of what it's like, and it may help you understand your own abilities better. He reached out and lightly tapped her forehead. With a rush of air, Hazel felt herself flying at a great altitude, soaring over a vast plain of green grass and gnarled trees. As she soared over hills and streams, she drew nearer to a dense canopy which stretched out as far as she could see, an almost unreal shade of vibrant green. The trees linked, admitting little light between them as she dove between the branches, without disturbing so much as a leaf. Squirrels scurried across branches, chasing each other. Deer grazed, their ears occasionally flicking to ward off a fly. Blue jays flitted through the trees, announcing their presence with a squawk, while a hawk preened its feathers in the high branches of an oak. Several amphisbaenae rolled across the ground, propelled by their small legs, and resembled small serpentine wheels. The deeper she explored the forest, the darker it grew, and she had the strangest impression there was more beyond her sight. Rings of toadstools appeared regularly, forming perfect circles. Lights periodically blinked and disappeared, shifting with some unhidden purpose. The animals were larger and older than those before. Great elk strode glowing through the dark with an air of solemn nobility, while crows watched her as she passed. She heard innumerable faint whispers through the branches, as she sought the voices, seeking to understand what they said. The whole of her vision filled with two large, almond-shaped eyes radiating a pure white light. "Begone!" Hazel felt like she had been slapped as her vision hurtled backward at an extreme speed. She fell in reverse until she landed back in her body with a jolt and searched Llewellyn's room wildly as the dark elf warlock watched her. "What happened?" she asked when she understood where she was. "That was farsight," he replied, folding his hands together. "That was incredible. I've never experienced anything like that before." "Really? Never?" he asked doubtfully. She looked at him quizzically. Was this sort of thing common in Eliara? "No, never." Llewellyn cocked his head at her. "Interesting. You were directing my sight. Normally I would have been in complete control, but you were more insistent than I expected. So I decided to see where you'd go." It's unusual for someone who hasn't had farsight to know how to use it. She was still trying to orient herself to the room. Where was I? It's easier for me to see places I've been to before, so I took you along the path I traveled to get here from Eliara. I was not expecting you to delve so deep into the forest. What happened? I could hear whispers, and then it was like someone told me to leave. She felt the giant white eyes were still staring at her. Your inquisitiveness intruded upon the privacy of the land. You met one of the constant guardians of the forest, a wood elf. He noticed her glancing around the room. You needn't worry. The wood elves have no interest in you. Any residual feelings are likely a consequence of their little reprimand. How did they know I was there? Wasn't I invisible? Elves are magical and can sense how magic flows around them. Imagine a still pool you might rest in. Now imagine someone drops a small rock in. Barring the noise, would you notice the ripple? She considered this. I think it would depend on the rock. Precisely. The bigger the rock, the closer it is, the easier it is to sense. Of course, it may also depend on how vigilant you are as well. One person might be more inclined to notice slight changes around them, whereas another might miss the obvious. Wood elves are the most vigilant of the elven races. They monitor what occurs in their forests and maintain balance while protecting against intruders. The whispers you heard were the elves communicating telepathically, which is the primary way elves speak. While they likely noticed your presence from the moment you entered their forest, when you spied on them, they cast you out. A simple feat, assuming one is attuned to such things. It seems you only slightly bothered them, which is why they chose not to do something more unpleasant. What could they have done? Llewellyn shrugged. Many things. They could have trapped you so you couldn't disentangle yourself from the vision. They could have caused considerable psychic pain or placed an enchantment on you to make life more difficult. Occasionally, if they are truly annoyed, they may choose to mark you. There are many things. She frowned. It would have been nice to have known the potential dangers before experiencing farsight. She decided not to bring it up. How would they have marked me? Llewellyn narrowed his eyes, searching for the right words. Wood elves commune with and control the creatures of the forest. Beasts, birds, insects, and even some reptiles and fish aid the wood elves. If they had marked you as an enemy, such creatures, if you encountered them, would make life miserable for you. They wouldn't risk their lives, but there are myriad ways animals can make life less livable. Fortunately, the mark usually only lasts a few weeks. Wood elves need to maintain the magic, and few have the patience to keep a grudge longer than a few weeks. In any case, I showed you how to see at a distance for a reason, and it was not for the sake of learning about my distant kin. I wanted to demonstrate how the sight can work and feel once you have developed it as a skill. Initially, when I would use it, it was how you experience your gift now. I beheld unknown places in a dream. As I developed the skill, I found I could use it whenever I wished. I simply had to improve at dreaming at first. Once I knew the experience, I could call upon it at will. While foresight is markedly different from farsight, there's enough overlap in use and understanding that this advice holds some weight. Okay, she said slowly. So, how do I get better at it? Is there anything I can do to practice? Llewellyn nodded. One of the easiest ways to increase your understanding and retention of dreams is to record them. Many people do this hoping to find esoteric meaning or prophecy. While most dreams people have will in no way be predictive, it's fortunately helpful to you regardless. Do you have something you can record your dreams in? Hazel thought back to the blank book Aldrich had given her and nodded. Good. Use it. Record as many details as you can, however insignificant they may seem. The more details you write, the clearer your dreams will become, and the clearer your dreams are, the less guesswork you'll have to do. The more you trust them when you wake, the more they'll come to you during the day as well. Besides that, I would like you to practice with me daily. What we do each day will vary, but I think it'll be most beneficial to show you how to notice magic and use it. She cocked her head. But I don't have any magic. He mirrored her confusion. You rose from the dead, and you can see the future. Is that not magical? I know when children are young they're tested for arcane proficiency, but whatever you were told when you were young has changed. You can predict the future, so you're using magic whether or not you're aware of it. By understanding how magic works and how it feels, you'll eventually be able to use your foresight at will. Even as we train, you may find more of your dreams predict aspects of the future you hadn't expected. You may notice more details or see further into the future. It could be anything, really. Hazel frowned in thought. Could it really be as simple as he made it sound? She didn't feel magical, despite all evidence to the contrary. Still, his words made sense, even if she had reservations. Llewellyn watched her, his neutral expression unchanging as his eyes read her. With time, you'll recognize magic for what it is, he said. His words had a soothing and patient tone to them. Magic is like the air. It would be impossible to live without it, and yet we rarely notice its presence. Most don't even think of the air they breathe, unless it becomes poisonous or takes on odors. If you consistently train yourself to observe aspects of the air, such as temperature, humidity, and so on, then you could likely predict events such as an impending storm, or how warm it will be later, or whether it's spring or winter. To others, it would seem impossible to get such an understanding, but to you, it would seem as natural as anything. Magic is no different in that regard, except it's far more fundamental to the universe than air. Eventually, you will understand the basic workings of magic and notice when others use it. Any trained spellcaster knows how to use magic subtly, so even other casters cannot recognize it. But it's important for a beginner to get a feel for it first. Besides, there are many creatures, especially Fae, that poorly conceal their magic. Llewellyn uncrossed his legs and stood. Each time we meet, I'll show you some magic in an obvious fashion, each day being less and less conspicuous until you're attuned to the presence of magic. By seeing through my farsight today, you've begun to get a feel for it. You may not realize it since the magic was so obvious, but eventually you'll understand the common thread in every spell. That common thread is the stream of magic. For today, this lesson is concluded. You should rest a little before we leave. It has been almost 2 hours since you first entered my room. Hazel's eyes widened. 2 hours? We only talked for maybe half an hour. True, but using farsight took more time than you realized. Over an hour, actually. But it only seemed like a couple of minutes. He shrugged. Magic. Perhaps you can take this away from the lesson as well. Magic affects time in unexpected ways. It must also be equalized. To see so far away requires a counterbalance. I used less magic than I needed to, simply to show you a small piece of the wonders of magic. She shook her head. Amazing. Indeed. You should get ready for tonight. I will prepare myself. If you remember any other additional details of your dream, let me know. I will. Thank you, Llewellyn. Hazel got up and made her way to the door before turning to him. Also, I hope one day you'll feel joy without exploding. He looked away and shut his eyes. He crossed his legs into a sitting position, except instead of sitting on the ground, he levitated at his height, as if he were still standing. Hazel returned to her room with much to consider.